So I actually got my start studying in Papua New Guinea, and I was studying new media and how it was affecting very remote areas of Papua New Guinea. And new media there was actually books. It wasn't anything exciting like you see up here. But it brought to me a number of questions I thought were really important, and mostly about the importance of media and social change. So think, for example, just if you do a quick rundown of human history, the importance of speaking in the organization of bands and tribes, the importance of writing in the organization of empire, the importance of the printing press in the Reformation, the Enlightenment, and so on. And the reason why media is so important in all of these major shifts is because media ultimately shape and sometimes limit and sometimes even dictate what can be said, how it can be said, who can say it, and who can hear it. And you take it a step further and you recognize that media also shape how things will be stored, how they will be accessed, and actually what will be stored and what will be accessed by who. And when you add all that up, then you're into the level of, basically what is a society's knowledge base going to be and what's going to count as knowledge. And you take that another step and you start to see that media can shape all levels of culture, from economics to even really important things like core values and things like that. I'll get to some of that in just a moment. Now, where I'm starting from is this idea that media are not just tools. We hear that a lot, but I'm going to suggest that media are not just tools. Media are not just forms of communication. Media mediate relationships. So when media change, relationships change, and therefore you see these broad changes happening throughout society. So I'm going to start with just a real simple rundown of television and how it changed our society, and then I'm going to shift into new media to show you what's happened since then. So I'm going to, first off, look at what happens when television enters into a living room. You have to rearrange your furniture. It really reshapes the relationships in the family. And let's face it, this isn't just the living room. This is also people's dining room in a lot of cases. So this is essentially the American dining room reshaped around the television. And as Neil Postman has pointed out, I'll just do a 60-second rundown of Neil Postman's argument about television and how it's affected culture. The conversations of our culture are ultimately happening here in the television era. Those conversations are controlled by the few and designed for the masses. The conversations are always entertaining. That's how you get the masses watching, even the serious ones. So our political debates go from long-form political, truly debates, to what we see today, which is more like 8-second sound bites, more like an entertainment situation. The conversations are punctuated by 30-second commercials, and these conversations create our culture of irrelevance, incoherence, and impotence. And what he means by impotence is he asks you, like he's writing this book in 1985, and he asks you to imagine yourself in 1985 watching the most important program you can imagine. You can imagine watching the news in 1985, and he asks you a series of questions. He says, so what steps do you plan to reduce conflict in the Middle East, or the rates of inflation, crime, or unemployment? What do you plan to do about NATO, OPEC, the CIA, et cetera? And then he takes the liberty of answering for you. He says you plan to do nothing, which is basically what you could do in 1985. There weren't a whole lot of options. And so here we are bombarded with media, and this has a particularly profound effect on our youth and how they're learning about the world. And I just want to show you real quickly here a commercial here. This is created by Dove as part of a campaign to demonstrate how this mass media onslaught is affecting our young girls.
Younger, smaller, lighter, fuller, tighter, thinner, softer. It really works.
This is a very powerful commercial. It demonstrates, I think, Marshall McLuhan's famous aphorism, we shape our tools and thereafter our tools shape us. But something interesting has happened recently, and you guys all know about this and how new media is shaping our society in new ways. And I have this little clip here that I think demonstrates a sort of a hero for our mediated culture of today. I'm going to leave out all the sociology for you guys, but this guy really represents the sort of lonely individual that sociological thinking has been theorizing here for the last few decades. So he's this lonely guy, comes home to Sydney, doesn't have anybody to hug when he gets to the airport. So he goes down to the mall with this free hug sign, And eventually, somebody gives him a hug here. And then you'll see that this free hugs movement actually starts to spread. Other people start taking up the sign, start getting hugs themselves. And this spreads throughout Sydney, and the mall is just sort of rife with these free hugs thing. Well, then it goes on to YouTube. It gets over 45 million views, and then it goes global. And this is where a number of interesting points can be made about new media and how it's shaping our society. The first point, of course, is that it's global. The second is that you have individual pursuits leading to large-scale collective actions. And third, you could also point out that you've gone from this lonely individual thing. We've had several decades of sort of being trapped in our homes with our television sets, and suddenly people are wanting to reach out. Of course, on YouTube, there's always the parody, and here's the...
These are really, really good. And they're not as smelly as the hippie hugs.
And this is where things get really interesting, because sometimes these parodies are actually really quite cutting and important. And just draw your attention back to that Dove commercial. Here's a remix of that Dove commercial, which probably could never existed on network television, but it did exist on YouTube. Here's the remix. A lot of you are probably actually familiar with this. One way or another, you're familiar with this, not just this particular video, but perhaps movies like, or videos like this. This one in particular was very effective. 2 weeks and about 1 million views after this was created. The creators of this were at the table with Unilever, Dove's parent company, and Unilever actually signed a moratorium on deforestation. So that was actually a great moment that actually demonstrates also that this is not a one-way conversation. And speaking of conversations, here's another interesting example. This is Sean Ahmed. He was a graduate student at Notre Dame, sitting in a room like this, hearing about poverty and thinking, what can I really do about poverty as a graduate student? And he just decided to get up and leave. He actually left the university. He was saving up some money to buy an Xbox, and he decided to spend it instead going to Bangladesh and trying to do something real about poverty. And what he's trying to do is change the conversation. So what he does is he goes around Bangladesh and other places in the world. He creates now over 100 videos about poverty through his eyes. And then he, in the meantime, gets over 279,000 followers on Twitter, starts up a type of organization that a lot of NGOs could only dream of copying. Essentially, he puts donors directly in contact with the people that they're helping, which is something donors really like. And he does it all through this community-generated space, like you'll see here.
You guys, through your votes and video responses, will decide how I will be spending some of this donation money.
Hi, Sean.
Hey, Sean. Hey, Sean.
We donated. We were very, very glad to do so.
Here is my vote. Rebuild the school.
There's so much here that you can point to, and one thing I want to point to is something that maybe just went right under the surface there, and that was the music in the background. Because the music in the background was also created through a global collaboration of artists working together, almost accidentally. So here you've got Colin Mutchler, who uploaded the guitar track to OP Sound, and then Cora Beth from North Carolina picks it up and plays the violin over the top of it here that you hear. And then that's posted, and then Vavrek over here takes all these clips that are being posted to OP Sound and creates the soundtrack that you just heard on that video. And there's something I think especially important about thinking about music in this collaborative space, because when you think about these collaborations that are happening here, all these spaces are in a sense spaces for collaboration in which and each one structured in a different way that actually shapes what can be done in those spaces. And so music actually becomes an interesting way to look at this, because it's a way of sort of seeing and feeling the layers upon layers that are created through this. So here's a project from Eric Whitacre I think demonstrates this really well. He had some music up on iTunes. One of his fans picked it up and sung it back to him on YouTube. And he was so moved by hearing this person sing his music to him on YouTube, they thought, well, I could just create a whole virtual choir. So you could see there, he recorded himself conducting the choir. He put the sheet music up for free. And then he had all these people try out, and ultimately had, from 12 different countries, these 185 singers create this virtual choir. But this is really just a metaphor for the different layers that you see happening in this collaborative space. And sometimes it gets very serious. Like here you see the Kenyan elections in 2007 and the violence after that. These 4 Kenyans get together and they put together this thing called Ushahidi, which allows people on the ground with their cell phones to report on the violence and troubles that they're having at those times. And then other people on the ground can then receive updates based on where they are through their cell phones as well. They essentially unleashed 45,000 citizen reporters to talk about, so they could share information about what was happening on the ground. 3 years later in Haiti, that same software is freely available because those 4 Kenyans give it away for free. And some students at Tufts University are able to implement it for Ushahidi Haiti. And you can see here they get, over 100,000 messages coming in. They're documenting these messages, placing them on the map. They're messages like this: "We are looking for Gaby Joseph, who got buried under Royal University." People on the ground get the updates, and these updates are mapped not using Google Map, but using OpenStreetMap, which is collaboratively edited by thousands of people around the world. Those are the maps that are ultimately on the ground. And here you see Clark Craig from the US Marine Corps' comment, "It is saving lives every day. I wish I had time to document every example, but there are too many. I say with confidence that there are hundreds of these kinds of success stories. The Marine Corps is using your project every second of the day to get aid and assistance to the people that need it most." I'll end there. Thanks. John asked me.
Just one thing, we can see why you're one of the leading media theorists, or theorists on new media. I know you're also a terrific educator. You were Professor of the Year in 2008. And you work a lot with educating kids on these tools. What do you tell them?
Well, I think it's not so much what I tell them, it's how you set up the environment. The key to me is not setting up a teaching environment, but a learning environment. We focus so much on setting up teaching environments, and I was just talking to Murray, like, teaching's not actually possible. People can learn, but it's really impossible to teach. But we set up these teaching environments where you have all these neat fixed chairs and these neat rows. It's basically an information dump, but people don't learn well that way. You need to set them up engaging real problems, working together and using the right media at the right time, and then they end up practicing the tools that they need to be great learners. So.